It's the official Catchup podcast. It's me, Ben Grant, and I'm joined again by Chris Pow. Chris, is this a comeback?
Maybe. I don't have any lead up to a title of a song after that, but maybe it is. We'll have to wait and see.
Of course, we are back. We talked most recently about the murmurings and discussions of the latest restructuring plans. There, I think we were calling it Plan F at that point, but I think we're moving on to Plan G at this point, Chris.
Yeah, obviously a lot of sort of development since the space of a week or two. It always seems to be this time of year, just as it's deja vu. Every sort of March, April time, there's positive things about the league. Obviously, team of the season, players doing well, and then suddenly we get reconstruction rumours and whatnot thrown in there, like we have for maybe the last 2, 3, 4 years, maybe. Who knows?
Certainly, I've lost track. I've been involved in this podcast for about 3 or 4 years, and I think I've had Stevie Aitken's League 3. We've had the Conference Leagues. We've had the B teams. We're on to the Highland League proposal, I guess we'll call that, and then we've got the latest version, the latest single by the West of Scotland board that seems it's coming out of the woodworks. But just to set the scene for those who have been living in a cupboard for the last basically month or so, forewarning, I am wearing a salmon pink t-shirt just before anyone says anything. I think that might come up in the comments, especially in the Lowland League group chat on WhatsApp. If you aren't a member there, come and join us. There's a lot of good people in there. We have a good chats about all different things in the Lowland League. At the moment, it's just really East Kilbride and the fact that Stevie and Shieldsy have got trophies everywhere, medals, all sorts. We just see them all the time talking about their trophies and their medals. So fair play to East Kilbride. They're certainly doing good things. But yeah, back on topic, shall we say, is the league reconstruction chat. So let's just timeline what's happened so far. I think we started to hear a bit of a murmuring coming out of the kind of social media channels that we all have and follow, that there was going to be a talk of reconstruction put forward by the Highland League, which was the suggestion was that they would have Brecon from the Highland League join a Lowland League East, and there would then be a Lowland League West that would come in, and they basically were redrawn the boundaries where basically the Midlands League in the East would fall in the Lowland League territory, and there would be a new West. It would incorporate some West of Scotland teams plus the South of Scotland teams plus the Lowland League teams that are, I guess, West dominated. So that happened. There was some discussions that came around that went to the Pyramid Working Group, and the Pyramid Working Group seemed to, I think, at that point, unanimously agree that would be a way to go forward, but it would obviously need some sort of mechanism to do that, and that would be ultimately down to the Lowland League, who would have the final say, because if all the leagues at Tier 5 agreed on it, then this would happen. So the Lowland League then got to a point where they had what I think they're calling an indicative vote about it, which was to basically decide whether or not they want to discuss it any further or not. That seemed to go through with a team abstaining. It wasn't East Kilbride. Yeah, I know Mick Kennedy will be watching this and he'll get upset because people were saying it was East Kilbride because they obviously have potentially a chance of going up to the League 2 through the playoff, and therefore maybe I think people surmising that they wouldn't have a say in reconstruction of a tier they're no longer in. So that's not the case. It was another team. We don't know exactly who that was.
I do, Ben, but I'm not.
You do. I mean, Chris, if it's factual, then I think it's worth saying. So who was it?
I'm inclined to think it was my local team, but again, I don't know why people are so obsessed with these things. I don't know why they would abstain from the vote anyway, but I believe it was them, from what I've been told. So.
Chris's local team. So if you know where Chris is, then you know exactly who you're talking about on that front. If you don't, then probably go and find it on Google. I'm sure you'll get it somewhere. But that vote happened. There was then more discussions, more chats at the Pyramid Working Group that took place involving all the leagues below Tier 5, including some of the teams in the leagues in Tier 6 and below. The indicative vote took place. That passed, moved to the Pyramid Working Group. There was a discussion at the Pyramid Working Group about some of the kind of intricacies of how this league would form. And then the Lowland League then met back up had another vote. That was more of I think they were kind of maybe being, maybe formal. Not pressured, but pushed to get a final decision on the stance of that particular proposal that came from the Highland League. So they had another vote, and that vote, I believe, went against reconstruction as it was. Another abstention. Don't know if that was the same team or not, or it was someone different. They essentially rejected that plan. So from there was then another proposal that started to kind of be rumoured, shall we say. I don't think there was a lot of knowledge. I was certainly getting messages. The proposal itself seems to be coming from it's coming from the West of Scotland Football League. Whether or not that's coming from the West of Scotland League board itself, or it's coming from members of the board, I'm not 100% sure. I've had some suggestion that's not, unanimously agreed by the board. And what I would say, and I'm talking here as probably a member of the West of Scotland, there hasn't been discussion with the members at all at this point. So this whole proposal is coming out of, the board, the people who run the West of Scotland Football League, not anything to do with the members. We haven't been consulted at this point in time. So we are kind of not in the dark now, because it has been a dossier, shall we say, sent out in the last few days that we'll talk about in a bit more detail just shortly. But so Chris, just to bring yourself in, up until that point, what's your overriding feeling?
Well, I'd heard pretty much from the indicative vote that the Lowland League, what we always hear, is a done deal. But actually, from about last Sunday, I would say, I heard actually it wasn't a done deal. I heard clubs were changing their minds about it. And the reason being, and I think this is an issue for everyone, for the West of Scotland, East of Scotland, everyone that could be affected by this, was the fact that it's too fast. To have it in place for next season in April is a bit mad. There was also issues around some things that we didn't cover that I think we will probably get into with the West of Scotland proposal, but obviously what's going to happen with the Scottish Cup. We kind of covered it a wee bit, but obviously teams potentially skipping 2 tiers and licensed clubs this season and whatever else. I think there was a general feeling as well in the Lowland League that possibly one of the reasons it was getting sped through, obviously I would imagine I know for a fact one of the biggest supporters of it were Broomhill. Now they're bottom of the league. They support it to kind of save themselves, of course. Obviously, you've got Gala as well that were in the mix there with Thomas Brown, the league chairman, obviously at Gala as well. So, I'm not going to say that Gala were supporting it because I don't know. We'll hopefully speak to Thomas sometime in the future. But you would imagine that they would want it through for similar reasons to say Broomhill, because it essentially would save themselves from the potential of relegation. So, the same from Sunday, I think in the group chat that I heard it wasn't a done deal, and funnily enough, it wasn't. And from the last podcast, everyone knows that I was kind of more against it than yourself, Ben. So obviously for me, I think it's a good thing. Yeah. The overall thing, I've mentioned all these sort of why it didn't go through, but from the indicative vote, the clubs wanted more details, and I believe the details weren't satisfactory. And I think you're an idiot if you're wanting to pass something through that you don't have the full details for. Simple as that. And I agree with the clubs, the Lowland League clubs, for not passing it through if that was the reasons, obviously.
So moving forward, Chris was obviously referred to the vote that took place, I believe, on Monday of last week. That was Monday, I think it was Monday evening. It took place at the Lowland League met and had that vote. There was then some discussions. I believe the Pyramid Working Group met in between that. I'm not 100% sure on what day that was, but there was some sort of meeting there. Then, these rumours, as we said, started to come out. There was another proposal coming down the line. And on Saturday, the West of Scotland Football League wrote out to the members to basically say there was no real update other than they had another alternative proposal that they were going to present to the Pyramid Working Group on the 22nd of April, and that the Rod Houston from the SHFL, the Scottish Highland Football League, has got the responsibility to go and garner views of all the leagues regarding the governance, promotion and relegation of that proposal. So they were going to meet on the 22nd of April, and the intention there was to then for the West Scotland teams to meet on the 24th at their general meeting, which is a week on Thursday. That's where we're going to get to. That's the next couple of weeks, and I guess what's happened before the timing. So let's just get into the suggestion, what the proposal looks like, because I think what happened was on Sunday, the West of Scotland Football League then wrote out to their members with the dossier that we're referring to. It had a lot of detail, shall we say, in it that covers off, the whys and what's the reason, the background behind why they want to do it. And I think the ultimate idea here is to try and obviously change the structure of the football pyramid from tiers 5 and below, but also I think looking at that kind of, I guess the things like the travel, economics of the league, the administration. There's a lot of things that we don't talk about. There's a lot of emphasis on which team's going to get into this whatever proposal it is, but there's a lot of nuances to that, I think, and that's important. So firstly, the intention from the West of Scotland Football League is to merge effectively the West of Scotland League and the East of Scotland League with the Lowland League, or vice versa. I'm not really sure what way you want to shape it, but basically bring the teams that are in the Lowland League currently under the auspices of the West of Scotland and the East of Scotland Football Leagues, which essentially is, removing the Lowland League as it stands, as its own entity, away from the pyramid, and then bringing all the other leagues, up a tier, if you like, into tier 5. So you'd have 2 leagues at tier 5, 1 league in the West, 1 league in the East at tier 5, and there'll be the Highland League. And how that would be shaped would be that the Premier Division, as it is now, would be that tier 5 league, and that would be fed in from the West Scotland First Division and the South of Scotland Football League. The East of Scotland Premier Division, as it is just now, would be fed by the East of Scotland First Division and the Midlands League, and the Highland League would be fed by the North Caledonian League and the North Region League. Essentially, what the West of Scotland are looking to do is probably a lot of the things that we've discussed, Chris, on this podcast before. We're talking about nomination of champion clubs. To be tier 5, you've got to be licensed. I think that's an important thing, and we'll get onto the licensing probably down the line, Chris, in terms of discussion. But they want to have champion clubs nominated if they're winners. For example, if it was like Beath last year, where Beath won the league, didn't have a license, could then Clydebank or Auchinleck Talbot, whoever it was that finished second or third, could be nominated as champion, and therefore they get promoted. I think that makes sense to keep the pyramid flowing first and foremost from my perspective. They'd also look to have the 3 up, 3 down, like we've currently got in the West and East, which I think is an important thing we want to see happen in the Lowland League, which doesn't happen as it stands. I think that's another positive thing to bring in. And then you've got also that point around around governance and administration of the league. There's you have more bodies involved at the league level. I mean, I don't think I think a lot of people are saying the Lowland League would disappear, but in actual fact, I think merger's probably the better word to be used. I think around this.
I disagree with that. I think it's a blatant power grab by the West of Scotland. I really do. Obviously, because there's Lowland League teams in the West of Scotland, or would be, there's probably not much sort of change there, if you will, because they would still be involved within the West of Scotland. But if you look at the proposal compared to the other proposal, there's probably not much difference, other than the fact that the West of Scotland have literally saying, the Lowland League can't govern their own league, so we're going to take over. Basically, that's all it is. To get onto the professional game board, I would assume, so they have, a say higher up. You obviously might have different views with that. I agree with all the good things you've mentioned about the proposal. I think it's a good thing, but to be honest, as I said, it's not that different to what the Highland League were proposing, apart from the fact that the West of Scotland and the East of Scotland somehow take over the Lowland League, which is interesting. I think it's sheer hubris, I would say, for anyone. I mean,
for this podcast, I must say, I don't know what that means, but fair play.
Hubris. How do you describe hubris? I guess a lot of confidence. To even propose something like that, especially since you're wanting to take over your, I guess for lack of a better term, your overlords a tier above you. So I get it. I get the change in governance, but I'm totally against it, Ben, because it would be like the Lowland League saying to the East of Scotland or the West of Scotland, well, you're a tier below us. We're now going to start governing how you want, how one of the Premier divisions, right? Okay, we're now going to govern that. It's like, what gives you the right to do that? I just don't understand that from that point of view. You can't just subjugate someone's power, and it is blatant. I mean, that's the only difference with that proposal, other than I think the relegation from tier 5 to tier 6 is a lot clearer, obviously, in the West proposal.
So I think you make an interesting point there, Chris. However, I would throw that back at you and say, the Lowland League as it stands already has members of the East of Scotland involved in the Lowland League for things like the fixtures, competitions.
Yeah, but that's one person. That's one person that's involved. You're talking about the fixture secretary, yeah.
If that's the case, and you've got one person doing the job of 4 people, then it doesn't sit well with me to begin with. That's a lot of work for one individual. We talk about fixtures in the West of Scotland. We talk about fixtures and how difficult a job that is for Kenny Young, who I'll put my hand out here just now and just say does a great job under very difficult circumstances. Does he piss me off with some of the fixture decisions, like going to Athlete at 6:30 on a Wednesday night or tomorrow? Yeah, absolutely. But I think on the whole, he's got a difficult job and does what he can in terms of what's in front of him and the challenges that you have around ground sharing, no floodlights, all that sort of stuff, council facilities. That it's a difficult thing that we as clubs don't really understand. But if you're saying to me that the person who looks after the finances, looks after the fixtures, looks after the competitions, and is the general secretary of the league is the one person, then bringing the West of Scotland and the East of Scotland into that kind of fold, there'll be people there that can do those jobs and provide.
But why does the West have to? But why does the West have to take, or the West or East have to take complete control? Why can't they actually be nominated a part of the Lowland League? This is what I mean.
What I would expect would happen would be that the West of Scotland would obviously have an AGM coming up in the next couple of months, probably the middle of June when it normally is. The people who are currently on the West of Scotland board would probably stand for re-election alongside those people in the West of Scotland. In the West teams that are involved in the Lowland League and vice versa in the East. I don't think it's a case of we're just going to bin off the Lowland League completely. I think that idea, nefarious intentions from the West of Scotland. I think the West of Scotland, what they're coming with here is a proposal that they see a better or an improvement in what we currently have. It'll improve things like like we say, the admin. There'll be more responsible people at the board level at Tier 5. There'll be that step into the professional game board, which I think it's not as as cutthroat as people are suggesting. I think that's the first thing. It's coming here with the intention of having improvement for the level. It's having improvement at Tier 5. There'll be that step into the professional game board that I think for me as a member of the West of Scotland, I think is a good thing for both the West of Scotland and East of Scotland as well. Let's not forget, and obviously the South of Scotland, because they'll then come under that umbrella too. So I don't think this should be seen as some sort of underhand snide move from the West of Scotland. I think they are coming with the best intentions. I know, Chris, you're laughing because I know you have a view and it's shared by other people. I get it, but I think I would also say I know the individuals involved, the West Scotland board, pretty well. I've done work for them in the past. I know the likes of Matt Bamford and John Dalton, those kind of guys who are really involved. I've already mentioned Kenny Young. They are good people. I don't think they're the type of people I would say that have these kind of cruel intentions that everyone's making out. I think that they're coming with it. There's obviously discussions happening that around restructuring it, and that's something that I think is important to suggest. These discussions are ramping up. We've seen these things in the past, and they die in the water pretty quickly. From previous conference leagues, Stevie Aitken's League 3, all that sort of stuff, all died in the water quite fast. This one's keeping going and keeps going up, and it seems like it's getting towards whether it's going to happen now. Obviously, some of the proposals have suggested that this will happen next season. That's a big talking point. Should it happen next season? Should it happen the following season? I'll be quite frank. I'm not asked either way. I think whether it's this season or next season, I think it's going to happen at some point. I think we just have to rip the band-aid off and get it done. And what I would say, I think as well, Chris, maybe to your point, you're talking about why can't the Lowland League just why can't the guys just join the Lowland League? That's a good point. But what I would also say is my feeling now is for the Lowland League is if the Lowland League don't get on board with this, I think they could be in a bit of a tight spot, and this can be forced. That they be forced their hand. They've obviously had the chance to accept a restructure that was suggested and they've rejected that, they might find themselves, if things are forced through by the Professional Game Board, which I think the SFA have a mechanism to do that. I'm not 100% sure what the mechanism for, if SFA can, restructure the pyramid themselves, that's a possibility. Could the Lowland League face, a situation where they're out, out in the rear and they actually, it gets taken out of their hands completely? They had it in their hands and voted against it. I think they could have definitely, if they voted for it, they'd had it in control, but they're not. For me, that's now gone, and I think unless they come back around the table, the Lowland League meet, I think, also on the 24th of April. That's their monthly meeting, and they could maybe come back around and vote again and then they would maybe get that done and they'd keep control. Whereas, is it moving to that point where, like if some people are suggesting, there's an intention, a bad intention, then, are we getting to a point where the Lowland League are going to be forced out?
I want to make this clear. I don't have a horse in the race here. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of people think, oh, well, you've been a Lowland League podcast. But at the end of the day, when we started this podcast, the West of Scotland didn't exist. As far as I'm concerned, we cover all the leagues: the Lowland League, the West of Scotland, East of Scotland, South of Scotland. But you're saying, obviously, it's not really affecting anything. Well, it kind of is, because the Lowland League would cease to exist as a league entirely. And again, it goes back to, and I'm not doubting the intentions of the people that you say. There are good people involved in the West of Scotland, East of Scotland, the South of Scotland, and certainly in the Lowland League. But it does come across as we know better, and a lot of the things in the proposal I've said that I agree with. Obviously, the promotion relegation from Tier 5 to Tier 6. There's a thing about clubs, I can't remember the wording on it, but might not be necessarily ready for promotion and they can choose to be promoted or not. I think I really like that. It's a proposal based on, in my opinion, getting into the Professional Game Board. That's all this proposal is for. It's nothing new to what was compared to the Highland League proposal, other than the promotion relegation, and other than the West of Scotland and East of Scotland taking over the Lowland League. And that's all it is. And to me, that is a blatant power grab. For a lack of...
But I think, Chris, so the landscape of football, non-league football as we'll call it, has changed since the Lowland League was incepted. The Lowland League was built on application primarily for a lot of teams, and they joined under their own intentions, and that's fine. We can go back in history and see that the West Region Juniors blocked that from that move to the pyramid. For whatever reasons, I don't really know. I wasn't involved in football then, but I know that that was what happened back I think 2013, 2014. I only got involved in this level of football about 2019, 2020. So my I don't have the the junior mentality maybe that others have, and knowledge of the junior game certainly, and have no real interest in it, and not in a bad way. Will I watch the Junior Cup? Probably on BBC Alba. Yeah, probably would, but I don't think I'm a junior guy. I'm predominantly looking at it from the non-league to the pyramid, and wanting to see co-winning obviously progress as much as we can through the pyramid, and that's why I got involved, because I like the idea of having a essentially what is a professional football team in my local town, and what that brings to the town, and what that helps the community, and what we can do there. I think that's why I'm my reasons for being involved in football. People have different reasons. They just enjoy football, but that's the thing I think for me is that the landscape has changed considerably. We now have a lot of clubs both in the east and the west that are licensed. The movement through the pyramid, what we like to call it ventilation, isn't really there. This is a way to fix that, as far as I'm concerned. We also have, like we say, clubs that are licensed that we're raising the standards of this level of football considerably. In terms of you going to grounds, I would much rather go to a ground that's licensed and like an Auchinleck or a Cumnock or these kind of places than going to I'm going to say some clubs' names, and it's not meant to be insulting, but it probably will come across as insulting. But the Garp Cairns, the Drumchapels, the Ashfields of the west of Scotland, I'm not too sure what it's like in the east in terms of those kind of grounds. But they're not really real football grounds for me in terms of what I want to see. But I don't have an objection to Astro. I think that's the thing that all these clubs have in common. They've got an Astro surface, but so the Cumnock, so the Benburb, but they still feel like football grounds, and that's what I want to do, is go to these places. I think licensing is important, to raise those standards, make sure our players are, trained in the right way and have the right facilities and all that sort of stuff. I think these are important things in terms of licensing. So I think Tier 5 has to have a license. I think that's important to me. I think that's something that should happen. And because we now have all these licensed clubs, there is a landscape change, and I think we have to maybe look at now doing something to change that landscape, to get the more natural pyramid set out in a way that makes more sense. And for me, this proposal, I think, does that to a point. I mean, I still believe there are some nuances that need to be thrashed out and sorted out, but I don't think it's a terrible thing, I would say.
So it is actually a good proposal. I agree. There's a lot to it that we have even talked about in the past, such as nominating a champion. I think that's a really good thing. The free up, free down from the West of Scotland and East of Scotland leagues makes a lot of sense, especially in like a 16, 18 team league. I think one thing we've not really touched on is there was a bit of a lack of detail on the B teams, obviously, and that's the divisive issue in the Lowland. Would also probably carry on to the East of Scotland and West of Premier, I guess, rather than the Lowland League West and East, because obviously Hearts B would be in the East of Scotland Premier and Celtic B would be in the West of Scotland Premier. But interestingly vague in the proposal, Ben, I would say.
Yeah, so I think probably that's probably down to maybe not knowing, what the B teams' involvement. I mean, they haven't spoken to clubs, so I'm assuming they haven't spoken to B teams specifically. I should say that if they have spoken to the B teams, as a West of Scotland Football League member, I'd be severely pissed off about that. I think that would be pretty poor that they go and speak to, the Celtic and Hearts B first before talking to their members. I think that'd be a very, very poor dereliction of duty, I would say, for the people that are involved in this proposal. So I don't think they'll have had that discussion, so they won't maybe know where the B team stands. Celtic B and Hearts B could turn around and go, we don't like it, we don't want involved anymore. That's as it stands, they are guest clubs within the Lowland League, which is a phrase that we use at the moment. As I understand, what would happen is, Hearts B are already a member of the East of Scotland Football League, and I assume then at that point that Celtic B become a member of the West of Scotland Football League. I think is how it would probably play out. My only concern, I think, I would add about B teams, and I think I've not seen this said anywhere else. Would that open the doors for other B teams to come in at the fold? Would Rangers B want a sniff at it? Would Kilmarnock B want a sniff at it? Would Hibs want a sniff at it? Looking up to the Highland League, Aberdeen, would they want to look at it? Inverness have also got a few issues at the moment, themselves. I think the last thing they're worried about is a B team, but then do you look at Stranraer Reserves currently in the South of Scotland League? Are they then going to be looking to move through the pyramid? Because I think what would happen if they become members, they certainly could move through the pyramid to the point of which they couldn't become an SPFL club, but they could definitely, promotion and relegation could definitely happen for B teams, and you may find yourself in a situation where we're talking about members, and we're all running through the list of suggested kind of indicative members to the new Tier 5 leagues, but could you end up in a situation where there's less West of Scotland clubs involved and more B teams involved?
I think that's interesting, because what I believe, and you've probably heard the same, the SFA really want to push this through. And it's curious. I'm always curious about why they want to push it through. Obviously, we know Brecon have their sway, but why? And the last time I ever remember the SFA pushing something was the Conference League. And what was big about the Conference League? B teams, having a tier for B teams. So the distinction between member and guest clubs are really important, because it doesn't matter in terms of the B teams in the Lowland League. I know people claim it does, but it doesn't really, because they don't have any voting power. They can't get promoted. Now, if Hearts go into the East of Scotland and they are already members of the East of Scotland, what does that entail? If Celtic B go to the West of Scotland and they become members, is this a backdoor route into them having the same rights of every member of a Tier 5 club and promotion to the SPFL without the SPFL having to vote for B teams to come into the league? I don't know, but that is interesting for me. Pure speculation, but it is interesting.
I don't think, as it stands, the SPFL allow B teams at any point. I think there's definitely a glass ceiling there in terms of.
But what is stopping them? what is stopping them if they're full member clubs in Tier 5?
Yeah, I mean, that is probably an interesting one, but I think, as it stands, that's probably the situation. If we can get clarity on that, we will. But I think that's probably the
I believe it's doubtful, because that was one of the reasons why the Conference League was booted out in the first place, because of the whole B team thing, and them having the ability to obviously go through the tiers. Really, PFL clubs and clubs at this level were not really for that at all. So I think that's, I guess, a kind of exclusive, Ben. But I have heard we both know that it's probably going to take the SFA to come and sort this out, and I do believe they are coming up with their own proposal, a bit of an exclusive, to try and sort it out. But I'm guessing it'll be along the lines of Conference League Plan Z. We're on Z now, so
Z. Okay, I thought we were all on F, but that's fine.
It's like what I said. It's like what I said last podcast. This sort of thing's been coming for a while. It's every season that we're hearing about reconstruction. I think it's going to come eventually, whether they sort of go past the Lowland League in terms of what they want, or what the West of Scotland or what the Highland League want. I guess it's up to the SFA in this instance. I just feel a wee bit sorry for the clubs at the moment, because they don't know nothing from what I gather. The managers, the players don't know nothing. They don't know what's happening next season even. And I think that's a shambles. And I kind of feel sorry for the leagues in a sense too, Ben, because obviously they can only go with what they know. And at the moment, everyone's in a wee bit of kind of what the hell's going on. They're kind of coming to the likes of us and whoever else and saying, "Oh, what do you know?" Well, we're in the same boat sometimes as well. So it's tough. But I do believe, I have heard that the SFA are probably going to have their own proposal.
So if that is the case, right, and it's probably not going to be a million miles away from what's been put on the table just now. It's probably going to be quite similar. I think that backs up my point of view about the Lowland League. Maybe have shot themselves in the foot here by not by taking this forward themselves. They had that in their power to go and do that, and I think they may have now lost that power. I think they probably still have time to come back to the table and change their vote. They could potentially vote it and deliberately vote it for next season. For example, there's a lot of discussion about that, where is it coming in for season 25-26, or should it happen 26-27? A lot of people are saying it's rushed, it's this, it's that. Now, yeah, I can see that viewpoint, in terms of that thinking about it being rushed, and what does it mean for leagues as they stand just now, and what does that look like for clubs preparing for next season? Yeah, I mean, I'm in a situation myself, as a club, where talking about budgets and things like that.
Don't know what league you're going to be in.
What budget does it look like? We're potentially having to budget 3 times at this point, because we're looking at a potential Lowland League where we would have to travel to Gretna, Newton Stewart, Cumbernauld, probably the furthest travel for us in terms of a difference in what we have to do just now, whereas we're maybe then looking at a Premier League with the furthest travel for us probably being Shotts, which again is probably still quite far, but that's the furthest in terms of, and south is probably going down to Glenathens, which is not too far from us in Corinne. But alternatively, we could end up in the first division and be in a situation where we're back to where we were, and depending on the shape of that, have we potentially got are we in a league with Johnston Borough, Drumchapel, Gartcairn, Hurlford, etc., the non-licensed clubs, because if something's going to change if we have to stay there, then so be it. Firstly, I think we have to decide, is it happening now, or is it happening later on?
Yeah.
That's the first thing, and if it is happening now, then fine, let's just do it. Let's rip the band-aid off and go and do it and get it done and get us prepared for next season. If it is happening for the following season, 26-27, then I think we have to set that out and lay that land quite quickly. So the indicative list that has been presented as part of the discussions, and this is based off on the number of clubs from the respective leagues from the original Highland League proposal, does not reflect the subsequent agreement between the East Scotland, West Scotland, the Midlands League, and the South of Scotland, as the number of clubs allocated to the new Tier 5 leagues. And the others that consider Club 42 being relegated, or the club being promoted. So the lists as it stands that have been suggested here are In the Highland League, it would be Banks of D, Brora Rangers, Bucky Thistle, Clackanicudden, Devon Vale, Formartin United, Forest Mechanics, Fraser Borough, Huntly, Inverurie Local Works, Keith, Lossiemouth, Nairn County, Rothes, Strathspey, Turriff, and Wick. In the east of Scotland would be Berwick Rangers, Bowness United, Brecon City, Broxburn Athletic, Civil Service Strollers, Cowdenbeath, East Stirlingshire, Galliferdine Rovers, Hearts B, Linlithgow Rose, Trinent, University of Stirling, and then joining from the east of Scotland would be Musselburgh Athletic, Hillabeath Hawthorns, Jeanfield Swifts, and Haddington. In the west, it would be Albion Rovers, Broomhill, Cali Braves, Celtic B, Cumbernauld Colts, East Kilbride, dependent on obviously the outcome of the SPFL playoff. Getting at 2008, Newton Stewart, Clydebank, Auchinleck Talbot, St Cadoc's, Pollock, Cumnock Juniors, Glenafton, Winning Rangers, and Rutherglen Glencairn. Now, I think we'll obviously focus, Chris, on the east and west side because we are essentially a Lowland League podcast. On the east side, it makes a lot of sense. I think in terms of the clubs that have been listed, I think they do make sense in terms of who would be interested. The only one I think that maybe be missing for me is Socky. I don't know if they would maybe be, I think, close enough to being around, but that's just probably looking at things based off of league position at this point.
Yeah. It's more merit based, but like we mentioned in the last podcast, obviously because the West of Scotland teams haven't involved in the pyramid as much, obviously there's going to be a bit of a difference in licensing.
So when it comes to the West, I think there's a suggestion there of 8 teams being in there from the West Scotland Football League as it stands. Obviously, straight off the bat, ourselves and Rutherglen, I have a horse in the race. I want Cowan to be as high up the tiers as I can. What I would say, in terms of that, I think it's important to look at what happens with Benburb and Darvel because they are also licensed clubs. They are sitting around the bottom of the leagues as it stands. If they get relegated, then I think and Cowan and Rutherglen do get promoted, then I think that's right. I think Benburb and Darvel should go down. I think we still should. I don't see this idea of being saved from relegation, but I don't think Darvel or Benburb are definitely relegated at this point. So that's one thing I would say about that. So I obviously would like Cowan to be in there, but if it means we're not, then so be it. Then as long as we finish high up, the likelihood of one of Benburb or Darvel or both getting relegated is probably quite high, and probably more so Darvel because of their situation in terms of points, deductions, and they've got a bit of work to get out of their spot they're in. So that's probably going to happen. Therefore, if it's only one team, it's whoever finishes higher between Cowan, Rangers, and Rutherglen, whether or not they get promoted or relegated or not. That would be how I'd look at it. The one thing I think from the list that that interests me quite a bit is where the name St Cadoc's comes from. I don't think they have a license, and from what I understand, they were kind of looking to get the license for sure. If that's the case, then where's that coming from? Have they been maybe mixed up with Benburb because they play at New Tinto Park? I'm not too sure, but I don't think St Cadoc's the team that I'd be looking to bring in. At this point in time, I think Benburb certainly deserve it and merit more than St Cadoc's are based on the licensing. If we are then going to open up to teams that are probably going to have the license this year, it brings in the question about Troon, perhaps, as a club that I think will probably have the license. I'm not 100% sure their situation, in terms of they have the ground in place, but they've got the stuff off the park sorted out. I don't know for sure, but if they are, then I think Troon would be more deserving of that spot than St Cadoc's, certainly. But the other teams mentioned, Clydebank, Auchinleck, Cumnock, Glenafton, I think absolutely they've had the license from day one pretty much and deserve a spot. So I like the setup of the leagues. I would be looking forward to going to places like Albion Rovers and Gretna and Newton Stewart. They interest me in terms of trips away and going and seeing. And obviously, I think for the fans, I think that improves the league from a fan perspective. You're going to go to get to see a lot of decent teams, more West, more maybe build more rivalries between the clubs in your local area and just make it more interesting. I don't find the Lowland League as it stands we always talk about that big gap between the top and the bottom. There's 3 or 4 teams at the top of the Lowland League as it stands that are probably going to challenge, and there's 2 or 3 teams at the bottom that are probably going to fight for relegation. And there's a big kind of gap in the middle where it's just kind of teams kind of. I always called them, what was it, the Meh teams? I think that was probably, that's the way I see that. I think when you bring this league into the way it's set up, it's much more competitive. I think that's the thing that stands out on both sides, east and west. I think it becomes much more interesting. There's probably.
And you said you weren't a junior man, and it's literally a glorified junior league.
No, it's not. I mean,
it is a wee bit. Come on,
Broomhill, Cumbernauld Colts are by far not junior teams. These are probably the Meh teams that we refer to.
All right, okay. I'll take it back. It's like what I said in the last podcast. It's like going back to the junior days of.
I mean, it is. I mean, obviously there's similarities to the Super League era. That's probably quite similar. With that regard, we're not a kick in the arse away from going back to the districts. The next time we know, the next plan will have the Ayrshire League and the Glasgow League or whatever.
Speaking of regionalisation, I think it's funny, and I would actually be outraged right now if I was in the south of Scotland, because obviously the west and east are kind of getting promoted to tier 5. If I was the south of Scotland, I'd be like, no, let's get another tier 5 league. Let's get south of Scotland at tier 5. No one's talking about them, and obviously they're the most regionalised league in the whole pyramid. In my opinion, obviously just Dumfries and Galloway, and yeah, they have to stay while east of Scotland, the west of Scotland have to go up. I don't know about that one. Like, someone needs to speak about the south of Scotland and get them up there too, Ben.
The one team you think about, if you talk about south of Scotland, top of 3, they'll have maybe will be raging. They move to the west, if this happens, because they've obviously moved for their own reasons, but they're now looking at it going, they could be sitting in tier 6 with one step away from tier 5, and maybe there's a move there. They can go back. We'll call them flip flop if that's the case. But,
speaking of comebacks, by the way, there is a South of Scotland team that followed the Catchup recently that has been out of the South of Scotland League for I think a few seasons now. So maybe there is another comeback there. Heston Rovers.
There we go.
Yeah, so I don't know if they're making a comeback or if it's just someone on the old admin, I guess, or on the old Twitter, I should say, or the old Twitter account. So, but I thought that was kind of interesting. There has been a few teams, obviously, that have kind of, Eyemouth being one of them, obviously, Eyemouth United, Rosyth recently, obviously, in the east as well. So hopefully some of these clubs can make a comeback.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I think, how it plays out. I think, we, as ever, have different views, and I think that's
what makes the podcast
a good thing. Yeah, in terms of for debate, I think we've had, there's been a good discussion. I think there's a long way to go in terms of how it plays out. But I would reiterate the point. For me, I think the one thing that stands out for me is that the Lowland League maybe have backed themselves into a corner here, and there could be in a sticky situation come a couple of weeks' time. I think they if I'm them, I'm maybe suggesting going back and having another discussion about the original proposal and taking control of that, and maybe have another vote. Perhaps, I don't know if that's maybe what they want to do. Vote number 42, whatever it is.
Here's another plan. How about the Lowland come up with their own proposal, since it's their league that is getting changed and no one else's? So there you go. How about focus on your own league and do your own?
But let's be realistic, Chris. Right? Doesn't matter what league proposes it. They're all going to look fairly similar. They're not going to be that different.
Well, we've seen that. We have seen that, and obviously, I'm kind of poking fun a wee bit the fact that everyone's kind of getting involved in it. The most changes it is with the Lowland League, obviously, but I think the only thing I disagree with the governance issue. But I do think overall, and I think you're with this too, Ben, but there should be more talk between the leagues, the Highland League, the Lowland League, the South of Scotland, the East of Scotland, West of Scotland, simply because there wouldn't be proposals coming from the Highland League or the West of Scotland if they all got together and decided, right, what's the best? But the problem is, we all know what the answer there is. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. Self-preservation. This, in my opinion, and this probably rings true, maybe even with yourself, Ben, the Lowland League doesn't actually need to change. If they voted for another relegation spot or maybe 2 or 3 relegation spots, no one would be bothered about the Lowland League because there would be enough ventilation, if you will, But because they're not going to vote for that, because the SPFL are not going to vote for an automatic relegation to League Two, proposals and reconstruction talk every year, as I say. So something needs to happen, and I think the West of Scotland, to give them credit, and the East of Scotland, to give them credit, have the right idea with free up, free down, and if there's not a licensed club, put forward a licensed club for your champion. I think that's we've actually talked. They probably got that idea from us, to be honest with you, Ben.
And that probably goes back to Moz's days, throwback to Moza, our good pal. I think he was, very much in favour of the champion club element in the past.
I like it.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, Mick, Chris, have you been reading Mick Kennedy's Twitter or something? Because I think that's his angle quite a bit, and I think that feels like you were rhyming off some of his tweets here.
He was writing off Ming.
Oh, was that right? Okay.
Mick obviously has an opinion on it. Obviously, we share kind of similar opinions, and I do see some of Mick's stuff. But I think it's a really good proposal. Like I've said so many times during this podcast, I just don't like the governance thing of it. Again, there's times on this podcast. In fact, out of all the leagues that we've covered, we've probably criticised the Lowland League the most, I would say, because they're the ones that, from the relegation promotion thing to the B teams to whatever else, right? I just don't think we can have our opinions. But just because you don't agree with something, or you think, this vote's went wrong, you can't just strip out democracy. You can't just say, oh, well, actually, we could do it better. Let's just forget them. Because, I mean, that's not democracy. That's something else, So, I don't know. It doesn't feel right in that sense. And that's why I'm against it from that point of view.
Can I throw out my own proposal?
Yeah, sure. Might as well.
I've got my own idea. Why don't the Highland League, the West of Scotland, the East of Scotland, the South of Scotland, and the Midlands, and all the leagues, basically tier 5 and below, come together as one happy big family and have their own organisation, and just divide it up in terms of, north, south, east, west, whatever it is. Some may say that sounds like the juniors, but it's not. It's a new thing. I'm talking about a new organisation that looks after non-league football from tier 5 and below. We can discuss national cup competitions. We can discuss, potentially TV deals, sponsorship, all these things as one big entity. And perhaps we have, the regionalisation that we want effectively, because I think that's what we're driving to, is further regionalisation from tier 5 and below. That's the goal, and I think we can all agree on that as an end goal, but it's just how we get to that point. So, I'm happy to sit as some sort of mediator or founder of the new Scottish Football Non-League Association, or non-league, whatever you want to call it. Then let's have a chat. I am currently a man of leisure, so I've got a lot of time in my hands to discuss football and all sorts of shit.
I like that, Ben. I like that idea, and I think it's something. I think the West have actually, despite me disagreeing with, let's call it the optics of the proposal, the governance point of view, in terms of what they're trying to do with professional game board, I quite like that, because it does get a bit more say for especially non-league, I would say, within the actual professional game in Scotland. And I actually think there is something to that. I just think they went about it a wee bit weird, but I'm totally for that, in a sense that we've got to remember there's more clubs in non-league there is in the SPFL, and if there's more voices in non-league than that, and I know they'd probably be scared of that, but yeah, I think if non-league was ever to come together and put pressure on the SFA and the SPFL, I think that could only be a good thing in my point of view.
There we go. So we have it. There's the another catch-up exclusive. Ben Grant's proposal is to unify tier 5 and below from Gretna to Thurso and above, whatever the highest northern team is. I don't know who it's probably Wick, isn't it, or Strathspey or someone like that. My geography's terrible when it comes past Inverness, but whichever the team is at the north, we'll.
There was a map showing all the clubs in Scotland and stuff like that, and I never realised how far anywhere is from Fort William. They're just on their own which obviously a lot of people. I didn't realise that. I always criticise Brecon, obviously, on these things because I just don't like the way how things have went with them. But obviously, we have seen that sort of nature against Fort William when they were in the Highland League. We had similar issues with Highland League teams that didn't really fancy travelling to Fort William. They weren't allowed to play at their home ground, even though it was passed by SFA licensing. So I think there is a lot of issues in the Highland League with Brecon also. So they have a certain sympathy from me. So there you go.
Yeah, so I mean, I think obviously that's where it's coming from, isn't it? To stop those kind of journeys and travels. But the one thing I think about Brecon a lot of time is, they've been down there for 2 or 3 years. Why now? Why now? Why not just they obviously wanted to join the Lowland League originally. There was obviously the talk about the where does the line cross to be in the Lowland League originally.
That's one of the points, by the way. So because obviously Brecon kicked up a fuss about being in the Highland League or Lowland League, the line actually got removed for SPFL clubs, so they could basically go into what if the West I believe still have a line.
Yep.
So if they actually get put to Tier 5, I do wonder if that affects the line for the SPFL also, because obviously currently the Lowland League and the Highland League don't have a line because SPFL clubs can basically. Well, I think it's a nonsense because it's like, say someone like Forfar got relegated, we would be wondering if they were going to the Highland or Lowland, and that obviously affects relegation from each tier. So it is interesting with the clearly defined lines, I believe, in the west of Scotland and east of Scotland, whether that would become a thing again, basically erasing that whole need for it to be removed in the first place.
I think the thing will be is that obviously it's be much more natural for teams to fall. I don't think it'd be much more easier to work out where you'd want to go. I don't think it'd be a choice. I think it'd be aware of would be the West Scotland and South of Scotland. South of Scotland still sits at Tier 6.
Yeah.
Your only choice if you're wanting to go to Tier 5, which you obviously would, from a Club 42 perspective, would be to go to the West if you're a West team. So if you're a Stranraer, a Clyde or whoever, you would go there. If you're an East team, like say, still an Albion or Bonnie Rigg are probably going to come down at this point. If they do lose the playoff, I assume they are going to go end up the playoff, then they would automatically go to the East. I think that makes a lot of sense and very natural, rather than having to make a decision. Whether that's by you're choosing by location, or you're choosing by which league do you think is easier to win. That's potentially how some clubs would view it. But I think by doing this setup, it makes it much more natural and easier to form.
So no Glasgow Wellington into the South of Scotland League?
No, that was another one of the absolute ones that will go down in folklore as an absolute crackpot idea if I've ever seen one. But fair play to whoever came up with that one. That was a belter. I must admit,
you were a massive fan of that one, yeah.
That was great. That was. I mean, don't get me wrong. Before the West of Scotland Football League, came around. Colwyn and Rangers, as we were at the time, and the juniors, we were one of the first clubs to decide we were leaving the junior setup. I think us followed by Clydebank were quick to make statements about that. And at that point, the West Scotland wasn't actually formed, and we did have a discussion as a committee about joining the South of Scotland League. That was a chat. That was very much a possibility that we join the South of Scotland Football League to be able to join the Pyramid, because it wasn't.
Well, Edisport now, Cali Brave's done the same thing, but to be fair, they were playing at Annan at the time as well, so it kind of did make sense for them.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that have been interesting levelled at Cali Braves is, no, you got into the Lowland League because you applied. In actual fact, Cali Braves
they won it,
yeah. They won the South of Scotland and got promoted. So a lot of
the first club to do so, but yeah,
exactly,
a lot of people
folk are quite snidey about it and make out that they just got there because they appeared out of nowhere. But in actual fact,
not that it's going to turn into defend the Caledonian Braves for everything, but it's also with the B team vote as well. They got a lot of stick for that, but actually they canvassed their fans. One of the few clubs to do so, and they just went with what their fans decided. So you can't really blame the club for that, can you?
Question is, did they do it this time round, or did they just
well, we know that answer obviously because of the statement that was put out. But
so they never. So I'm not being naive here, but did they genuinely not vote? Did their fans?
No. Did you not see the statement with the?
I read the statement, but I didn't realise it was. That's what did that.
Or maybe that came off a vote from the fans. I don't know, but it did sound like Chris had a part to play in that one.
I'm sure there'll be plenty of fans of Calibrates on listening to this podcast, and they'll correct us if we're wrong. So you can shoot us up on Twitter at the official Catchup. You know where we are. If we're popular. Even come and join us in the Lowland League WhatsApp chat.
I'm not going to
lie. It's a weird chat. Yeah, there's some absolute characters in there. But it's a laugh. Fun. It's good fun. Yeah, I must admit, I've got to know a few people, through that, from Albion Rovers and East Stirlingshire, East Kilbride, Gretna, Bonus. Exactly. There's a lot of good characters in there, and I'm looking forward to if this thing does take off, be able to go and see people. I think that's a thing I enjoy, and certainly looking at the possibility. There's a lot to go in terms of winning in our situation, but I think if I get promoted, I'm looking forward to go back to see the likes of Clydebank and like Cumnock, Pollock, because there's good people involved in these clubs I'm friends with, and I like to do that. And that by extension, if the Lowland League teams come in, then that'll be also really interesting and exciting to do.
There's probably going to at least be a finalising podcast on this, no doubt, I'm guessing, if we hear anything. But from my perspective, I think it doesn't happen next season. I think it probably will be the season after. But I do believe, like I said before, and I've said numerous times, I think it's coming. I think a change is coming. It's going to be one of those things where it's just going to get...
song, Chris, isn't it? A change is
coming, yeah. Sam Cooke, yeah. Sam Cooke. That was a brilliant song, by the way, actually.
Sorry.
So, yeah, I think it's going to be one of those things where it keeps getting put through and then knocked back, put through, knocked back, and then it's finally just going to go through. A bit like politics, I guess. But like I say, I think the SFA are probably going to step in, put their own proposal. It's probably going to be terrible. They're going to have a wee chat about it again, and eventually we'll get there. But yeah, I feel sorry for the clubs and the people involved at all levels at the moment, because no one really knows, and sadly we don't have the answers. We can only go off what we know, which is a fair bit, but not the whole story, I guess I would say, Ben.
Yeah, obviously, we've said that already. The West Scotland are going to meet on the 24th. The Pyramid League are meet the 22nd. The chances are there'll be more detail. Will I attend the West Scotland meeting on the 24th? I may or not be at that one, so yeah, I'll be obviously privy discussions, and we can see what
get the camera out live.
That's that. We can live stream it. That'll be one to have. I think I did watch that one. But yeah, just to wrap up then, thanks for watching or listening. It's been good. The feedback from the first episode that we've done in a long while was really positive. The views, numbers that we've done has been really good to see, and probably fuels us to want to do this again. This is why we probably came back to the table, because people were asking for it. So we do appreciate your views, your likes, and your comments. So if you enjoyed it, hit like, subscribe, do all the good things you can do on social medias. We'll catch you all soon. Cheers.